Listen, life's all about leveling up. Whether you're handling business on the field or kicking it in your zone, you like to celebrate with cigars that match the moment. That's why you should link up with Famous Cigars to bring you a wild deal. Right now, you can grab 8 premium cigars for just $8. You heard that right. 8 top-rated cigars at $1 a stick. Top quality brands like Oliva, Romeo y Julieta, and Davidoff. Handpicked just for you and worth over $80. Hit up famouscigars.com/cam and lock in this exclusive deal. While you're there, check out their insane selection of premium cigars, all shipped fresh and fast from their massive 20,000 square foot humidor. That's half a football field. Famous Cigars has been in the game since 1939 and still family owned. So celebrate every win with the folks at Famous. 8 cigars for $8. famouscigars.com/cam.
Let's be honest. Shopping, not my thing. I go to the store. There's a lot of people that, it's just not my thing. It's not football. All right. I spend way too long scrolling websites just looking for something simple like a nice pair of jeans. And I'm either overwhelmed by all the choices or can't find anything my style and end up with stuff that doesn't fit and doesn't work. That's why I use Stitch Fix. You just take a quick style quiz, share your size, your vibe, and your budget, and boom, you're matched with a real human stylists who handle the rest. They take care of the work for you. They send you a fix box with clothes that actually fit and make sense for your life, work, weekends, whatever. It saves you time. You look great, and you don't even have to think about it. That's the best part. It's no risk, all style. Try it all on in the comfort of your home. Keep what works, send back the rest. Free shipping and returns, always, and no subscription required. Plus, get a free try-on for your first fix. Get started today at stitchfix.com/podcast to get $20 off your first order, and they'll waive your styling fee. That's stitchfix.com/podcast.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Coors Light. These days, everything is go, go, go. It's nonstop hustle all the time. Work, friends, family. Expect you to be on 24/7? Well, sometimes you just need to reach for a Coors Light because it's made to chill. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's as crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. It is literally made to chill. Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that's made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door with Drizzly or Instacart. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast.
We just needed to play with some energy. Last night we had dips in our energy and it cost us the game. We talked about coming out and just playing our style of basketball. We've been kind of lacking a little bit of playmaking with the second unit, so that was something I really tried to focus on tonight. I was just telling people out of the corners to come up, cut to the rim. When I catch the ball off the roll, somebody be cutting, and I'm glad they took my advice.
I'll tell you what, I'm glad they took your advice too, but they didn't take your advice at the end there when you were on a triple double.
Mikal owes me 2 and Julie owes me 1. That was what I was telling him.
Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here as always with Sam. We're going to get right into it today. We're really excited. We have a very special guest with us on the podcast, a writer at TheRinger.com, host of the Mismatch podcast, and host of The Void, an excellent show on The Ringer's YouTube channel, and the creator of the Bright Future Suns moniker, Kevin O'Connor. Kevin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great today, guys. How about y'all?
Pretty great.
We're doing great.
Really appreciate you coming on. I think that you have a very special place in a lot of Suns fans' hearts for sometimes the simple reason of you watched the Suns when they were bad, which I think is more than a lot of people did. Obviously a lot of people in the general public didn't, but I think to an extent, people who cover the entire NBA, they have to balance their time really carefully between the really good teams and the teams that are rebuilding or struggling or whatever the Suns were doing for a long period of time. And I think for us, for Suns fans, it was very clear that you were always paying attention and watching. As we've noticed, you recently released an excellent video on the Ringers YouTube channel for your show The Void on Mikal Bridges. Everyone go out and watch that right away. It's fantastic. Kevin, why did you pick Mikal as the subject of that video? What about him made you want to talk about him?
I feel like every team, all 30 teams could use a Mikal Bridges. And for Phoenix, he's just a absolute dynamite fit next to guys who are going to handle the ball a lot, like Chris Paul and Devin Booker. And ultimately, with him, I feel like his ability to defend equally well. People talk about defensive versatility. I feel like he is so good both against some of those speedy guards or some stronger guards or even some bigger wings and forward types. I mean, we've seen him defend Kawhi Leonard. We've seen him defend Donovan Mitchell. We've seen him defend Steph Curry like in Thursday night's game. He is a dynamic defender who can do it against anybody. Then offensively, he's someone who kind of lost a shot after his time at Villanova. He had the hitch, as Suns fans know, and he's gotten through that and has become really one of the league's knockdown guys who does more than that with his ability to cut, with his ability to attack closeouts and make nice little accurate passes to Ayton in the dunker spot or kickouts to Cam Johnson or whoever it might be for three. I just feel like he is a good all-around player, and he feels like somebody who can only get better, and he's somebody that could fit anywhere. Every team could use a Mikal Bridges, and that's why we wanted to do the video about him.
I love it. At KOC, I mean, Mikal Bridges has been a pretty good defensive player since he came into the league, and so it's nice now that the Suns are good that he's getting credit for it, but particularly with some of the stuff you brought up on offense is stuff that not a lot of people on the national level are talking about. I really liked the minute or two that you spent talking about his cutting, because that's something we've talked about here on his podcast of Mikal Bridges hasn't necessarily been cutting as much this season, but when he does do it, he's very good at it. In fact, I don't know if you watched the game last night, but just last night, it was kind of a vintage Mikal Bridges-esque performance where he snuck his way to 20 points by using a lot of cutting. My question for you, a guy like that, to me, one of the things that makes Mikal Bridges most interesting is that I look around the league, I don't see many guys who are good at both cutting, putting pressure on the rim, also being these good three-point shooters now that he's gotten his shot back and has a little bit of shooting gravity. How do you feel about that aspect of his game? Kind of like the idea of being a superstar role player, if that makes sense. And if you are one of those players like Mikal Bridges, where do you find the balance between doing those two things and kind of finding your spots within the flow of the offense?
That's a really good question. And, just you mentioning him being a star in his role kind of makes me think of like how we kind of determined to present the video. Like the headline was like emerging star. And I mean, like star can be looked at as so many different ways, like top 10 player, top 20 player, MVP candidate, or it can be star in their role. And ultimately, I feel like he's exactly that, as you said. He's a star in his role. And part of the reason why is because he does and that's one of the things him and I talked about, is his ability to balance and read the floor and read what his defender is doing. I thought his quote inside the video about, oftentimes he's defending the best player on the other team, and oftentimes that best player is defending him because the opponent may want their defender to get a little bit of rest, chill out, thinking, spot up shooter, just relax. He's standing here in the corner. And Mikal was like, there are times I'm standing there spotting up in the corner and I see them relaxing. I recognize that he's relaxing. He's not in a defensive stance, so he's just kind of dazing out, whatever it might be. And he knows that's a moment for him to cut to the rim or do something off ball, set a screen, whatever it might be to make the defender work. And I feel like with him, you said how the word you used was snuck his way to 20 points. That's what happens a lot with him. Like even his 34-point game, a lot of it's just within the flow of the offense. And with him, I feel like he's just a smart, high IQ player, and so much of that comes from his time. He said, playing in a high school system that emphasized cutting and passing, and then playing in college at Villanova, motion offense, one of the most really pro, offenses that we have in college basketball with Jay Wright there. And then now in the NBA with Monty Williams doing what they're doing, I feel like it's every step of the way has been perfect for his mindset and approach to the game and the way he looks at it and making winning plays. and he's just been in good developmental situations that have only further enhanced that ability. So he has that balance.
Yeah, I thought one of the more insightful things in your video was when you noted that he doesn't like the 3-and-D title for him specifically. And I don't know that it was necessarily players like him, but specifically him, that he feels almost like it's sort of boxing him into a guy that just shoots and plays defense. And I thought that was especially interesting that, I watched that video yesterday, and then to watch the game against the Warriors, something he noted after the game was that he hasn't been run off of his three-point shot in the NBA until recently. It's just now that people are covering him like he can make it at a 45% rate, because he struggled in his first 2 seasons. You noted the hitch in the video as well. And Monty told him to look for ways to cut. And it was interesting to hear him, to hear you note that on your video. He doesn't like that moniker. And then to see him take advantage of people running out to the three-point line at him and finding ways to cut. And somehow Frank Kaminsky, of all players, finding him on those cuts over and over and over again against the Warriors. I do want to ask you, what do you think he's going to be eligible for a contract extension, and it's going to be a fascinating thing to see what he gets in that contract extension. I've noted it before. If for some reason they don't give him an extension after this season, Suns fans can feel free to protest that as much as they want. I'll join them. But what do you think his ceiling is as a player? He's older. He was drafted as a guy who went all 4 years in college. This next contract's going to be important for him. How good do you think he can be in this next contract?
I think so much of that is partially due to opportunity and situation, and with Devin Booker there, and we'll see how Chris Paul ages, and if he stays around for X amount of years, like deep into Mikal Bridges' next contract. But ultimately with him, I think in all likelihood he'll become like a better version of what he is today. You mentioned attacking closeouts. That's one thing we didn't really hit as much in the video. I think he's quite good at it, considering the fact he hasn't been run off the line a heck of a lot until this season. But it's still an area of improvement. And ultimately for him, I'm not sure I see the on-ball shot creation role for him in Phoenix. But if you're able to get that out of him in moments, that is what can really raise his ceiling. If that can happen before contract extension time or during that next contract, ultimately that's really the only significant missing piece in his game is off the dribble. This season he's only 7 of 24 on dribble jumpers in the half court according to Synergy, so below 30% shooting. He's better than that number. He was better last season, but continuing to improve his ball handling, continuing to get better, scoring against a defender being in his face. That's what can raise his value, but I don't know if that opportunity will be there in Phoenix. I mean, do you guys see that path towards more like pick and roll opportunities for him in the near future with Booker and Chris Paul and even Campaign coming off the bench helping run the offense?
I personally do. The reason being, we'll get more into the overall team and maybe some of the weaknesses in a little bit in the conversation, but the Suns right now are a very contact-averse team. That's just how it is when you have a Chris Paul run team. And so any guy who's willing to put a little bit of pressure on the rim and try to get to the free throw line, I don't necessarily know if Mikal has it in him to be good at it this year, but I do think the opportunity is there for anyone who wants to try. Even just in the past few games, they've been encouraging without Booker in the lineup, Jay Crowder, to attack a little bit, to attack closeouts when he can and run a couple pick and rolls here and there. So I do think the opportunity is there. I don't know if he's, as you said, I don't know if he's going to be super great at it. I do want to ask you, though, kind of moving on to some of the team defensive schemes, something tangentially related to the video. The most animated I saw you get, KOC, in the video was not actually about Mikal Bridges, but it was on a clip where Mikal Bridges gets beat, and it's Deandre Ayton who rises up for a flashy vertical contest, and you were ecstatic. You looked like someone who was about to be edited into a meme with the Shooting Stars song. Maybe one of our listeners.
I went into space.
You went into space. Maybe one of our listeners can help us with the assist on that after we release this. But talking about DeAndre Ayton, the pick and roll defense that the Suns play doesn't help without it doesn't work without a lot of moving parts. But obviously, it all starts with DeAndre Ayton aiding Mikal Bridges. How impressed have you been with the strides Ayton has made in his defense since year one?
It's incredible. I mean, it truly is incredible. And I know he could be nitpicked, sometimes off ball, miss rotations a little late. Like it happens. And that's frustrating at times. And you wish sometimes that would go away. But ultimately what he was as not just a rookie in the NBA, but what he was as a freshman at Arizona, the difference is so dramatic that this isn't something that I could have seen coming from him, because I liked Ayton as a prospect. I did a lot. I believe I had him ranked second behind Luka that year, and ultimately I viewed him as a good fit in the NBA, a good long-term guy. But for him to be doing it already in year 3, considering where he started, that's abnormal to me. And I think that's a testament to the work he's put in individually. It's a testament to the player developmental program there, the coaching around him, trainers around him, but also just specifically to his mindset. As a guy who's drafted number 1 in the draft, so many of those players, they might rather be scoring 24, 25 points per game, getting 16, 17 shots per game, up from last season. He had 15 shots per game last year. He's down to 10 right now. I don't think there are a lot of number 1 picks that would buy into that situation, to buy into this role in the way that he is. And I respect that, as a player, for him to do that to sacrifice those shots, because ultimately it's playing into the winning. And even if sometimes there's some mistakes on the defensive end, or sometimes like his turnaround jumpers on the post can be frustrating, and he still has little quirks in his game that you wish could be ironed out. But overall, I'm blown away by where he is in year 3 from where he was as a prospect at Arizona and where he entered the league as a rookie.
Yeah, just even the jump from where he was in college to the end of his first year, followed by another jump in his second year. The strides that he's made on defense has been fascinating. And I do think the nitpicking that you're talking about, I think, is especially interesting, because as soon as the Suns traded for Chris Paul, so much of how good they can be falls on how good Deandre Ayton can be, which is fair and unfair to him. He is good and he carries a lot on his back, but like you think about Devin Booker's third year in the league, there wasn't a lot of pressure for him to win at that point. It was mostly just development over time, and the losses came. Now there's just a spotlight on him, and from that perspective, the Suns lost 3 in a row. They won against the Warriors to stop a 4-game losing streak, which would have been disastrous for Suns fans and interesting for the team as a whole. When you look at where they are now after the Chris Paul trade and how they're performing, is it something where you think that they're underperforming at this point? Should they be better? Did you expect it to take this long for Chris Paul and Devin Booker to mesh? Obviously not a lot of time now with Devin Booker out. Or do you think it's something as wonky as just this COVID season and people being out makes it hard for things to work right away? Like, how do you perceive how they perform so far?
I'm not reading into it too much in terms of record of where the team is right now, considering guys have come in and out. Booker's out right now, so 9-8. Obviously you'd rather be 10-7 or 11-6 or undefeated, 17-0. But ultimately, I look at more the process of how some of these games are going. It's like the 2 overtime losses in a row to Denver this past week. It's like Ayton did a pretty good job against Jokic comparatively to how he did as a rookie. Yeah. You did that without Devin Booker, and the Suns are in those games, and shows that this is a new team with a new mix, bringing in a guy like Chris Paul, who really does change the way your team is in terms of leadership in the locker room, in terms of chemistry, the way it is, the mood of the team is different with a Chris Paul in there than with a Ricky Rubio. And the team already is meshing in a lot of ways. And I think I look at that more than the record right now. That I feel like, and this is true for every team in the league. I said this opening night, that I look at the first month as like an extended preseason, because teams are figuring out the COVID stuff. They're figuring out everything after a shortened off season and a shortened training camp and a very short preseason. That right now, the records across the league, there's a lot of wonky records right now. So with Phoenix being 9-8 overall, I'm encouraged, even though the record might be a little bit underwhelming compared to expectations.
Speaking of wonky records, they're about to play a really fascinating back-to-back with Dallas, who are 8-10.
Oh, yeah.
That could be fun. I want to ask you about perception. Because, again, Mike alluded to this at the beginning, but I don't think it can be overstated, KOC, just how much Suns fans love you for the Bright Future Suns movement. That being said, you interact with a lot more national voices than we do, obviously. I think we know how some other national voices feel about the Suns. Chris Vernon, obviously. Kyle Mann. No, not even saying anything about it. You know, your other colleague, Kyle Mann, is a friend of our pod. He's been on our pod before, and I think he has believed.
What a voice
he's great.
Kyle has, huh?
He's amazing.
Great.
Oh, he's amazing. But, you know, not just them, but generally with all of the national analysts and pundits, the approach that I've taken this entire season, I'll tell you, is I don't blame anyone at the national level who has to see it to believe it with Phoenix, because this is a franchise that's been plagued with a lot of issues for a long time. Now they're 9-8 to begin the season. It's a bit of a weird season, but you talk to other people. Do they see it? Are people at the national level starting to believe in the Phoenix Suns? And if not, what do you think it would take to get there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, people think it's a nice team. And I think in terms of like playoff expectations, there will be a large element of people who do want to see it to believe it, because there are also people who look at Chris Paul as somebody who flames out or gets hurt inevitably in the postseason. So you do have some people who look at the team as like a Chris Paul team, not a Chris Paul and Devin Booker and Mikal Bridges and Deandre Ayton team. And I feel like there are certain players on this roster specifically, like even a Cameron Payne. Cameron Payne is not the bust that we saw a couple years back. You know, I mean, this team, I look at the roster and this is a deep, strong team. It might not be a championship team. It's not a championship team right now compared to the Lakers or the Clippers or some of the, you know, the juggernauts in the league. But this is a highly, highly competitive team that I feel like is it's only really scratching the surface of what it can be in terms of the grand scheme of what the Phoenix Suns organization could be. Like, I'm not sure the Suns will be a title team with Chris Paul. I'm not sure. But I do know, like, Mikal Bridges is only 24 years old. I know Devin Booker is still in his young 20s. And if these guys can grow together and, like, over the next 5, 6, 7 years grow into something really, really special, then you're talking about being a favorite. Right now, they're that team that's going to have to have a lot of good fortune and luck on their way to really go all the way to a finals like we just saw with the Heat last year. And I feel like a lot of national, media that I talk to at least look at it from a championship perspective. So when I answer your question, I'm answering it in that way.
It's fair.
Even though that shouldn't be the approach, because it's really about like the next 4 or 5 years with this team and trying to become a title contender when they're not quite there yet. I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, it does. And I think it's interesting just because, like you said, it's about Chris Paul for a lot of people. I think that's really where it becomes interesting is you talk about the next 4 or 5 years, but Chris Paul has 2 years left. So I think for a lot of people where they get stopped up is failing to envision a future after that, and that's what the Suns still have to figure out. That's why creating positive momentum for them, even if it's only in the form of making it to a second-round series this year, will be so important for them.
No doubt, it absolutely is. And by the way, like Chris Paul, free agent, he can become a free agent in 2021, but he has the $44 million option. I would assume he'll pick that up. Who knows? We'll see. But like in 2022, 2023, when Devin Booker is near the end of his own deal, if Phoenix at that point has the perception of a team that is ready to contend for a championship with Ayton and Bridges coming up, that's when you're in a situation as a franchise where you can trade for anybody. That's a time where you can possibly sign anybody. And that, to me, is the intrigue more than anything else over the next 2 years. It's about the progress from individual players and the collective unit, especially the young guys, growing together to make Phoenix the clear next team. Like right now, I think they all are like one of those next teams. But there's a difference between being one of those teams and being, oh yeah, that's the next team that's going to be contending for a championship if one piece is changed or one piece is added, and they are on their way doing that. And Chris Paul, even if he's not part of the long-term future at 35 years old, he's not part of the long-term future. But even if you have him only for the duration of his contract or maybe a year or two after, more than that, that can go a long way in changing the perception of your franchise around the entire league from not just forget media, like that doesn't matter as much as like from other players, from agents.
right.
And that's what can lead to those big moves. And by the way, Chris Paul going to Phoenix.
Yeah.
Chris Paul going there shows that's already changed quite a lot.
Well, we have Ricky Rubio and Kelly Oubre actually to thank for that a lot, and Monty
Williams
too.
really is the real key for that, because Monty Williams made that. It shows how important that hire was. When it happened, it took a year.
Monty's
and a half
awesome.
Yeah, he's great, and everyone seems to love him. But since we're on the general perception of the Suns, and we're talking about Devin Booker a little bit, I feel like you were early on Devin Booker. Like, you understood the type of player that he could become, and I feel like the perception overall really started to change in the bubble, like from the general public or even people who cover the league. I mean, I've heard you take shit for it. Like, I've heard you take shit for it from whether it be Chris or Bill or people who just were not really there yet early in his career, which, as Sam said, is fair. Like, sometimes you just have to see players do it in order to believe that they can be that. Why do you think Devin Booker was such a lightning rod early on? It's kind of odd because usually it's like these high picks that are these lightning rods because the expectations are so high. This guy was picked 13th, outperformed his draft stock immediately, and then became the number one option on a team before he was old enough to drink a beer. But for some reason, there was a lot of criticism pointed his way. You picked up on it, but yeah, you don't know.
I don't know. I still don't really understand it. When I think back to some of the stuff that was said or written about from really smart people saying it, and it's like, this is somebody who in college at Kentucky ran 6 pick and rolls. I mean, what are we talking about here with his evolution? I never understood why. With Booker, it seemed like he was just getting beat downs from the media. Oh, he's a ball hog. He doesn't want to be double teamed during, summer workouts. It's like, we're focusing on all the wrong things here. This is an example of a player who busted his ass to work on his game and get better at his weaknesses, and has done it with a new coach every year, new GM, new everything every year around him, and yet through that, he's improved constantly and become a player with scalable talents that can adapt and play next to another star player. We're seeing that with Chris Paul. It's like, it takes a while to get adjusted and develop chemistry. But with Booker, the reason why he was a lottery pick is because of his off-ball scoring, his ability to shoot, his cutting, and be like a smart, secondary shot creator. For him to turn into a primary is amazing, especially at the level he is. I mean, I don't know where you guys would have him ranked in the NBA of like best players, but I mean, is he like 14th best, 15th best, top 20? No doubt top 20. And for him to become this guy is really a testament to the work he's put in. And I hate that he didn't get credit for that before the Suns got good. I feel like people give him the credit now, but the last 3 seasons, really, even his second season in the NBA when he started averaging over 20 points, that's when it was first clearly apparent that this guy is more than just a secondary presence, that he could be significantly more than that. And I don't know. I still don't understand the slandering that he got. It really doesn't make too much sense to me. People oftentimes don't factor in situation as much, and they just look at some of the negatives instead of how a guy's progressed. Like in life, I feel like I had this thought the other night, and it, totally unrelated to basketball, but I think this is way too deep, but I think it's important to remind yourself of who you were before in terms of like ways you've grown as a person and in ways you've gotten worse as a person. And also true in basketball. You have to remind yourself, like before last season, when people were talking about the summer, workouts, him not wanting to get double teamed and all that, you have to remember what Devin Booker was before, 4 years ago when he was in college, what he was as a rookie. And I feel like that part was completely ignored. And I mean, I think it's true, like in really everything in society right now, so focused on the negative instead of the growth a lot of the time.
That is very deep. For
no reason.
I love it.
I love it. And look, with the Booker discussion, where I'm at now, I'm almost grateful for the criticism that he got. I'm sure he isn't. Oh, well, he probably is because he feels that it made him a better player. I'm grateful for it because in a very self-absorbed thing that I'm about to say, I think it's made the Suns a smarter fan base, where now I've observed Suns fans will go out and will pay special attention to other good young players on bad teams and actually watch their games and not just throw around the empty calorie label so carelessly as I think we see a lot of people do. So I think it's been positive in that sense. Of course, we need to mention Booker's numbers are down this year. They're down to, they're worse than his numbers were last year or the year before, or even arguably the year before that. Chris Paul comes in. And interestingly enough, KOC, I think Chris Paul in the past few games without Booker in the lineup, he's actually gone back to hitting the shots that we're accustomed to seeing him hit over the course of his career. You had a very interesting conversation with Verno on your podcast, A Mismatch, a couple weeks ago, where you guys talked about the fit. And a lot of the conversation was kind of about, are the Suns doing the best thing for Devin Booker's development in particular? A lot of it revolved around pace. Has your opinion about that in the past couple weeks changed at all? Because we're starting to see CP3 kind of wake up a little bit. I think it's clear that he's not just having this massive drop-off. It's not like age is coming to bite him and he's lost a massive step. But we haven't seen him do it with Booker in the lineup at the same time yet. So do you still have faith that Booker can return to the lineup, these guys can play off each other, and most importantly, that it's a sustainable strategy going forward and to play playoff basketball?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to categorize or really give context to my comments that I also thought I could have worked with Chris Paul and James Harden. And I say that because that it did work. They went on 2 deep playoff runs. Chris Paul just unfortunately got hurt, and then they learned to hate each other. But ultimately, that's more of a Harden thing than anything else. Booker and Paul, to me, in a similar fashion, that these guys can excel together. And they do it in a different system. It's not, pound the ball, run a pick and roll, run isolation. It's not the Houston offense. It's more motion. It's more movement. It's more sharing of the ball. And Devin Booker, I'm sure for him, there's some level of adjustment to doing the things that he did before. And I'm sure for Chris Paul, there's some adjustment to going from, and the Clippers to the Rockets to the Thunder and now another new system.
Right.
But ultimately, I think, you mentioned shots weren't necessarily falling for Paul earlier in the year. He's still shooting below 30% from 3 in the season. I see those numbers coming up. I don't think there's any dramatic decline in Chris Paul's abilities or his, athleticism or speed. Nothing's fallen off. It's just 1 month into some weird season with all these, new rules that everybody's adjusting to. And without a full training camp, without a full preseason, this is another symptom of it just being extended preseason right now. And with Booker, I forget everything that we talked about with Chris Vernon and that, but ultimately I think this is for the best overall with Devin Booker's development, just to make that clear, because in order to win at the highest level, you need to play with other star players. You need to play with other guys that maybe means you don't touch the ball quite as much. And ultimately, I think these guys can thrive together, and they have really good pieces around them that can help support and enhance them. It just takes time, like anything else. Not every team, new cast of characters put together, clicks right away. It can take a bit of time.
It's kind of funny to watch Chris Paul try to speed up the pace a little bit, because it does not come naturally to him at all. It looks very intentional. He's so turnover averse. He just does not want to turn the ball over, which is great. I described it on our last episode with Dan Favali from Bleacher Report. I described it as someone who was clearly building a team for a long time to try to beat the Warriors, where they were trying to slow down the pace constantly. And even with OKC trying to slow down the pace against Houston and just grind everything to a halt. And it's like he has to go against those specific things that he taught himself how to do in the last few years. Always been a relatively slow player, but say it does click. Say it does start to work really well, and we start to see sort of the peak of this team, and they make the playoffs, they get to the playoffs. What do you think the height of this team can be in the playoffs? How good can they be? I know in the West, it's commonly matchup based in the playoffs. So a first round exit is not necessarily bad in the West, compared to a normal year. There's so many good teams now. But what do you think? What kind of heights do you think they could reach?
I think the realistic answer is second round in the playoffs. But then again, we just saw Denver go to the Western Conference Finals. We saw Miami go to an NBA final. So it would be unreasonable to just say, oh, it'll be the Lakers or the Clippers in the finals.
Right.
Like that, it's just, there's no guarantees here. Ultimately, I feel like Phoenix is one of those teams that if there's some good fortune that goes their way, if they have like a hot shooting stretch, if, an opponent player has a bad series, like last year with Denver and LA, Paul George has a horrific series. They blow that 3-1 lead. You need some good fortune to go your way. Even when you are the favorite, you need good fortune. And Phoenix would just need a little bit more of it to make, a deep, deep West Finals or even NBA Finals run. But ultimately, I feel like they have the talent. They have the talent to be right there in that level right below the Lakers and Clippers, like next to Utah, next to Denver. I don't look at Phoenix as, far off from them. And, I mean, in terms of team, like we talked about earlier, in terms of record, I don't look at their record as any detriment or knock against them. Just like with Utah being the 1 seed in the West right now, even if they end up with the 1, that doesn't mean that they're the best team in the West. It just means that they had the best regular season. But right. I do think the one thing I will say, the difference between Utah and Denver and Phoenix is that Utah's been together for a lot of time. Denver's been together a lot of time. Phoenix hasn't. And that experience does make a difference. Like if you're really splitting hairs, between teams, I'd put them slightly below because of the experience chemistry aspect. But like you said, if they get it together and if they're rolling, they're right there with those other teams.
I think if we're going back to talking about your realistic goal, I think any Suns fan is happy with getting out of the first round. You make it to the second round and this season is a success. Obviously, you want to push further than that. But just to get to that point, is there a team, throw out the LA teams for a second, don't even consider them. Is there a team in particular that would scare you if you're Phoenix in a first round series? And on the flip side, is there one that you think might be a favorable matchup if you had to choose between, Utah and Denver and Dallas and everyone else who's going to be there?
I like the way Phoenix played, even though they lost both games. I like the way they played against Denver, and I think Denver has some holes on defense that'll be more exploitable in the playoffs than we're seeing right now in the regular season. I mean, the loss Denver had with Jeremy Grant, forget about what he's done so far this year with Detroit, doubling his points per game, doubling his shots per game. I mean, it's crazy to see what he's doing. Just think about the guy that they had last year. That was an important defender on that team, a versatile defender. And I think about a playoff series, I feel like Chris Paul and Devin Booker could potentially feast if they're picking on mismatches. So that matchup comes to mind. And, I say that after I lost 2 overtime games in a row, but that's the way I feel about some of these West matchups. Utah is going to be tough. Yeah. I mean, their defense is fantastic.
Yeah. And they hit shots. They really hit shots.
Yeah, they hit shots like Mike Conley going back to being Mike Conley.
Exactly.
That makes such a dramatic difference with that team because it lessens the load on Mitchell to have to carry the offense. Utah's like really, really good, man. Like
I said,
they're really good.
I said just a few weeks ago that Utah was the team, specifically in our preseason pod, they were the team I wasn't afraid of. Because the entire reason you get Chris Paul is so that you kind of have this bicameral system where you've got these 2 scorers in the playoffs, and Utah doesn't have that with only Mitchell. And, of course, now they're making me eat my words. Their offense actually looks like a pretty well-oiled machine right now. So that's going to be tough. We haven't seen those 2 teams go head-to-head yet, but it'll be interesting.
And a lot of people, I think, after these 2 games against Denver were asking for that Phoenix-Denver playoff matchup, and I think a lot of Suns fans are now terrified of that. But I will say, Devin Booker didn't finish the first game. The hamstring injury happened in that game, and then didn't play at all in the second game, and they still took it to double overtime with Abdel Nader and Frank Kaminsky playing in the overtimes. That's not ideal. Even Dario Saric has been a huge piece for this team. Hasn't played due to COVID protocols, likely tested positive at some point. So that's a big piece missing. So that'll be interesting. I think that's a good team to look out for in the playoffs, and something that definitely could happen depending on the matchups in that first round. I just want to switch over to something that's non-basketball related. You play guitar. Our mutual friend Kyle is also a musician. I'm a drummer. I played in bands for 10 years. Sam, co-host here, plays piano. We're all musicians here. It's been, first of all, let's start a band. I'm all for it. I can do other things besides drums if we have another drummer. But 2020 was a weird year for me where I felt like I listened to less music than normal.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Sorry, I know I'm way off the trail here. I just listened to less music in general because I wasn't driving as much. Just weird things sort of stacked up that made it harder for me to find new music. Kevin, what are you listening to right now? Do you have anything that you'd like to recommend to us or our listeners?
I feel the same way as you do about music. I don't feel like I took the time to listen to full albums quite as much. Like my 2020 favorites is mostly stuff that was fed to me from like the Spotify release radar or like, Discover Weekly stuff. And I don't feel like I've listened to a ton of albums, full on albums. But in terms of stuff that's in my rotation, I'm trying to revisit some of the stuff that I did miss. In 2020, I've been listening to the new Fleet Foxes album. The full album is really fantastic. I mean, the first 2 songs off that album, it's called Shore, are just unbelievable. So I've been listening to that. I really, really like the live albums released this year by The War on Drugs, called Live Drugs. I really like the live Father John Misty album, and these are some artists that I've loved for years with their studio stuff, and for them to release live music, like Off Key in Hamburg is the Father John Misty album. Like it just helps make up for the fact that there's not live music right now.
Right.
And so I feel like I've leaned into, YouTube videos of live music or like the NPR Tiny Desk even.
Yeah.
That has helped kind of fill the void of not having the ability to go to concerts and be in a room of thousands of strangers. And I miss that. I look forward to those days are back. It's a good time. I mean, do you feel like you did most of your music listening in the car? Like why did you not seek it out as much?
Yeah, I feel like I was commonly... I think there was like I don't want to get too deep again here, but I do think there was like an emotional element of it where I just didn't. I think a lot of times I associated finding new music with just being happy all the time, and there was so much negativity that it just made it harder to seek out a lot of new music. So it was you get your spot. I have Spotify, so I got my Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year, and I still had out like 20,000, 30,000 hours of music.
Yeah, right.
But like it was still a lot. But like compared to a normal year, the previous few years, it was like half of what a normal year was for me. And I was like, oh, that's kind of odd. I didn't really expect that. So I think that was part of it. But I already listened to everything you mentioned here, but I'm going to listen to it even more now with you in mind, Kevin, since you joined us here. Sam, do you have anything else for Kevin before we let him go?
No. KOC, thank you so much for hopping on. It's been awesome, man.
I appreciate it, guys. One last recommendation. Steady Holiday. It has a new album coming out soon. I really like the singles from that. Living Life is my favorite single, but Steady Holiday's got some good singles out right now.
I'll check that one out.
Gonna play it right now.
There's a lot of good music coming out. It's just finding the time to listen to it. And thank you so much, guys, for having me on. It's fun to talk about the Suns, and it's really cool for you guys and for Suns fans to be rewarded with like a fun basketball team where there's hope, and it's like you feel like you're right there and have a chance in the playoffs after some of the the bad years recently, because even during those bad years there's been glimmers of hope, and for those times to be here it's pretty awesome. It's great to watch. I hope you guys have a nice rest of the season and a big playoff run too.
Appreciate it. The Bright Now Suns, as you said before. Definitely don't forget to read Kevin O'Connor at theringer.com. Follow him on Twitter. You can find him. Listen to the Mismatch podcast. Check out The Void, not just the Mikal Bridges video. I saw a rumor that maybe the next one will be about Lou Dort. As somebody who's in Arizona, I'm very excited about the prospect of a potential Lou Dort video. So if that's coming up soon, I will definitely check out that one as well. But take a look at all those videos on theringer.com. Kevin, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys.
We'll be right back with our friend David Nash to talk about Deandre Ayton.
The economy is made up of real people doing real stuff, and it affects everything. Which you obviously know since you're a real person doing real stuff. Marketplace is here to help you get smart about everything beyond the what of the day's business and economic news. We dig into the how and the why with the real people driving our economy. From big tech and interest rates to small businesses and what's happening at the Fed, Marketplace breaks it all down so you don't have to. Listen to Marketplace wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, very excited for this conversation. On our last episode, we briefly touched on Deandre Ayton, but I don't think that we talked about him enough after the stretch that he had recently, so I wanted to come back to it on this episode to talk more about how he's been playing lately. And coincidentally, our friend David Nash, the 4-Point Play himself, wrote an excellent newsletter about Deandre Ayton as well. So no one better to have on than David. David, how you doing?
I'm doing good, guys. I'm feeling the pressure a little bit here, being the encore to Kevin O'Connor. I know you can't track, downloads that only last 40 minutes through the podcast and then everyone turns off. But I'm just expecting that, there's a few people dropping off right about now that maybe came to the Timeline pod for the first time with that great Kevin O'Connor interview. But I'm happy to be here, guys, and always love talking about the Suns. So happy to get into it.
We're going to hook him with some great Ayton analysis and that Aussie charm, David. I think we'll get him to stay.
Yeah, we got multiple different time zones on this episode all over the world. You wrote about Deandre Ayton. He had possibly the best stretch of his career over a four-game stretch, where he was aggressive, he was rebounding, he was playing great defense, he was attacking the rim, he dribbled, he drew free throws. There was so much that we thought he did really well. You wrote about it. What stood out to you in watching that stretch?
Yeah, I think it's undoubtedly his best stretch, and that's why I was so excited to write about it. You mentioned, the newsletter there. I'm in a weird spot. I can probably only, write, once a week or every 10 days, and I was kind of sitting there going, Ayton was clearly the story of those last 4 games, and I'm always trying to think of something unique that I can bring or that, wouldn't have been covered by someone, that's smarter than me in Suns Twitter already, and what I could kind of bring to the conversation. And I was kind of just sitting there looking back at the off-season article that I wrote about Deandre, and just going through that checklist that I wrote. And I was kind of thinking to myself, these are all those things that I was saying he's flashed in the past through his first 2 seasons. I wonder how many of them, if I go back and watch these 4 games, he actually ticks off in these 4 games in a row. And, I watched the Memphis game first. All of a sudden, 3 or 4 already ticked off in that game. Get to the Rockets game. He's, 3/4 of the way through my checklist of sorts. And then the Denver back-to-back, he, thankfully for me to round it out, he kind of ticked all the boxes that I went through in terms of the flashes that he's shown in the past. So it just felt like the perfect opportunity to kind of, say, is it him finally clicking, is somehow some people put it. For me, it was waking up is kind of how I used it in those articles. And I just was so impressed that he had done all of these things that I felt were, the way that he impacts the game the best and the most in such a short period of time. It was a little bit, disappointing that the Suns were 1-3 in that stretch, but there were some other reasons for that I think were very much outside of Deandre Ayton's control. And then obviously disappointing that I pumped him up so much and the Suns went on to lay an egg against the OKC Thunder right after, and Ayton in particular didn't play very well in that game, but he certainly wasn't alone in that. So yeah, that was kind of the reason that I was getting to it. I just thought that it was you mentioned it there, was it his best kind of 4-game stretch? I think I looked at a few numbers and stats. There were definitely some other 4-game stretches where he was just as impressive, but I guess if we were to highlight one thing, the aggression, which I tried to highlight in that latest newsletter, was the big thing. That was the thing that had all of us on Twitter kind of going, whoa, who's this guy? Like, I just haven't seen this before.
Yeah, that was a great uniter of the fan base, I think, because so many of us have been asking for different things out of Deandre Ayton, no matter what end of the spectrum you're on, but I think everyone was united in the aggression. You broke down the newsletter in, I think, a really clever way, where it kind of started out with things where, the stuff that Deandre Ayton has always been good at, but then you progress to the stuff that he's shown flashes of, and finally the things that were so exciting that we've never really seen this before. Being a little more conservative, I kind of want to start with the basic stuff. I think a really interesting point you made, David, was talking about how effective Deandre was in that stretch, where his touches really didn't go up that much. The stat you used, he was averaging 51.6 touches per game going into that stretch, and then during the stretch, he averaged 54.8, so just 3 touches per game more. Obviously, in those 3 touches, there were really flashy, exciting things that we'll get to, but outside of that, it was about his mindset, his aggression, trying to look for lobs, strong seals, being a really good offensive rebounder. I mean, I think you can speak to it more than me, but just like, starting off with that basic stuff and just playing well within the flow of the offense. Can you speak to that and what you saw from DeAndre in that sort of realm? Because I think a lot of Suns fans still don't quite understand exactly what we're looking for out of DeAndre when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, I think it was after the Houston game that I tweeted about it, and he'd kind of had 26 points on 15 shots. And I went back through all of his made baskets, and it was, basically only alley-oops, some transition free throws he managed to generate, lobs, putbacks in particular. That's kind of one key for DeAndre when when he's getting to the front of the rim and getting offensive rebounds and putting it back in the hole. Dump offs when guys are driving and DeAndre's sitting in the dunker spot, kind of in the perfect place to capitalize on something like that. So, I think there was maybe one post touch that generated a basket for DeAndre in that game, and that was kind of the clear thing for me. Was like, look, he can have 26 points without feeding him, as some people like to say on Twitter. And I'm really glad that you kind of brought that point up, Sam, because this is where I really struggle with the conversation online about DeAndre, particularly when he only has, say, 7 shots in a game, and everyone kind of turns to the team. I do think that the team has a responsibility to get him the ball in the right spots for DeAndre so he can capitalize on some of those possessions, but I just don't think it's how, at least from what I see, the majority of Suns fans who are clamoring for that are discussing it. I see people talking about feeding him in the post and, kind of in the half court, getting sets that find DeAndre, with the ball on the low block isolated against his guy, and I just don't think that that's where he's the most effective. And the thing for me is, we were talking about this just before we hit record. I wonder how much wins and losses really change the conversation. I think they do a lot. And you mentioned it there with the paint touches. I've got paint touches, total touches, field goal attempts in the paint, and field goal attempts in total here for DeAndre last season, then the 8 games in the bubble, and then this season. And I just focus mainly on the bubble and this season as I run through them. So paint touches last year, 13.9. In the bubble, 11. This season, 11.9. Total touches last season, 60.3. In the bubble, 53.4. This season, 51.5. And you mentioned it just then, Sam. I think more like 54 in that 4-game stretch. So went up a little bit, pretty much identical with the bubble. And then his, total and paint field goals have gone down, last season to the bubble to this season, kind of one shot each sector, but not dramatically, and not dramatically enough that I think it's been noticeable. And, I don't remember anyone complaining about DeAndre's paint touches or his total touches in the bubble when we went 8-0. So I just think that the losses really changed the conversation, where I think in the bubble the Suns clicked of how he is best used, I suppose, and that's transferred over to this season.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up sort of feeding him. I thought that was part of the problem with the OKC game. See, after the 4 great games he had, the entire team, like you said, laid an egg in that OKC game. And I thought, posting up Al Horford, maybe you get 1 or 2 buckets on that in the entire game, but that's one of the best post defenders in the NBA. That's a guy that specifically was guarding Joel Embiid, and maybe one of the only guys that's ever been really good at guarding Joel Embiid in the NBA, and putting Ayton on him, I think, is almost unfair to Ayton. With Ayton, there's 2 advantages to him. He's strong and he's fast for his size. Mm-hmm. And I think when you have a guy like Al Horford on you, instead of using the strength, because that's sort of matched, maybe the speed is better utilized. Admittedly, they deserve credit. OKC did a good job defending, and I thought they packed the paint really well in that game, and the shots weren't falling from the outside. And if the shots don't fall from the outside when you're struggling to get shots in the paint, that's a recipe for losing in today's NBA. So credit to them for that. But finding ways to use his speed against a guy like Al Horford would be nice, rather than posting up. Monty's taken some heat recently, and I think that's part of the conversation. I think how people are affected by wins and losses. It's part of that as well. What do you think that he has done in those 4-game stretches? And I think there was the game against Golden State. he didn't really have a chance to come back in. I think it was kind of an up and down game for him, and then Frank Kaminsky just finished the game off. So I don't really judge him for that game. There was a good stretch, there was a not as good stretch, and it's whatever. They won by a lot of points, and that was a good game overall.
Yeah.
But going forward beyond that, what do you think Monty did and the coaching staff did for the Suns and the players to that extent that they could then duplicate going forward? What did you see?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's half and half, and I think it's shared too, just to be really clear. It's definitely not all on Ayton. I think his engagement and motor is 50% of it, and then the way the team is playing and the way that Monty's instructing them to play is the other 50%. I think everyone in Suns fandom that is watching these games has kind of noticed that we're a little bit too reliant on the outside shot. I think that's bleeding over to Deandre Ayton. In those 4 games in particular, I think they, in stretches at least, did a much better job of putting pressure on the rim and attacking the basket. And I think that's where you see a fully engaged Deandre Ayton kind of occupy the creases and get in for those offensive putbacks. And, he gets bigger and stronger the longer the game goes on and everyone gets tired. So, as simple as it sounds, I do think that there is something there where, just the more that the team is attacking the rim, the more opportunities Ayton gets to kind of impact the game on the offensive end. I think the other thing that they didn't do probably more than anything in those 4 games is they weren't force-feeding him in the post like we saw in some of the earlier games and then saw kind of creep back in that OKC game. I think I've said it online before, I think the longer, the play goes on and probably any more than 2 passes to get Deandre the ball, I think you've lost already, because I think the defense has adjusted and he's just not going to be able to attack from a position of advantage because we know he's just still a little bit limited in some of those moves that he's got. But to your point, Mike, he is quick on his feet, and with a guy like Al Horford, he can certainly jump out of the gym compared to a guy like Al Horford. So more pick and roll. I saw it way more in those Denver games and in the Houston game. They're running way more pick and roll with Deandre Ayton up high, spreading with the shooters. Obviously, when the guys outside are hitting their shots, there's a lot more advantage and options created for Deandre Ayton. But the other thing that we don't mention very often, which I mentioned right at the top of my newsletter, is him rolling hard to the rim every single time also opens up everyone on the outside. And I haven't dived into it. I don't think there's been long enough yet to really dive into the numbers of the Suns' outside shooting and how streaky it is. But I would hazard a guess that there's some correlation there between how dangerous Ayton himself is making himself going down the lane, and when some of those dry spells come with the open threes.
Pick and roll is definitely part of it, but the other part, though, that you stressed yourself in the newsletter is transition. I mean,
yes,
it opens up a whole other conversation, because I think if we talk about transition, we have to talk about conditioning. But just to touch on the good stuff first, when Ayton is running, you've shown, David, and we've all seen it, he's really, really, really hard to stop. And going back to Mike's point, he has the combination of strength and speed to exploit that in really interesting ways. One of my favorite plays of the game last night, one of the first shots of the game, or a couple nights ago, I guess, depending on when you're listening to this, one of the first shots of the game against Golden State, he got down early and he sealed off Looney like 18 or 19 seconds left in the shot clock, because it was Looney starting over Weissman, and he got a quick hook shot. But it was his ability to get down there within 6 or 7 seconds, so it didn't do what you were just talking about, David, where it bogged down the offense and they had to kind of try to find the work the mismatch after 2 or 3 passes around the perimeter. No, they looked for him fast. He was able to get the seal quick, and he went for the easy shot and rhythm. I really like when DA does stuff like that. Obviously, there's the transition stuff, just like catching lobs and hustling in transition. That's part of it too. But I think, even the post-ups, you can kind of work post touches in transition if you get a quick seal. In order to do that, though, he really has to be motivated to run. And again, I don't know if that's because he has to work on his conditioning or if it's because he sees that his point guard, Chris Paul, refuses to run the ball. So, I think it's on both of them. But what do you think, David?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think it's definitely on both of them. I think more recently, at least before the few injuries that just hit, we saw Chris Paul maybe responding to that transition criticism and kind of giving the ball up a little bit sooner to Mikal and Cam. But obviously then those two guys aren't as, skilled at getting the ball in those seal positions to Deandre Ayton. You'd definitely rather that Chris Paul's the one doing it, but he just, he refuses to get up the court in quick fashion at the moment, which, it's just not his game, so they have to adjust in other ways, and I think passing ahead is one way that they've looked at doing that. But you're spot on, as I said, that's a real key indicator early, along with the offensive rebounds. If he's getting down the court, beating his man, he did it with a guy like Jokic because he knows he's not as quick on his feet as Deandre Ayton. So if someone else secures the defensive board, Ayton just takes off and he beats Jokic down, seals off a smaller guy. And that's the situations where I can really understand DeAndre getting frustrated if he doesn't get the ball in that situation, because he's working his ass off to get that position. Right. He deserves the bucket. So that, and then pick and roll with Chris, they managed to, get him switched onto a small, which I tried to highlight a few times with a Jamal Murray or something like that. And that's just money for Jam as well in the paint for DeAndre. In the past, I've got a little bit frustrated that he passes out a lot of those situations, but particularly in that 4-game stretch where he was much, much more aggressive, we were just seeing him turn around, put the ball in the hoop, sometimes even turn around and dunk it, and that was why we were getting so excited with some of those games where he was just playing out of his skin.
This conversation, I think, has shifted to be so much about offense now, and I get why. I really do get why, because Chris Paul's on the team now, and Chris Paul and centers tend to work really well together, and you would have assumed that the offense would have worked better to start the season, and the defense worked pretty well right away. But I do want to just give some perspective, because as off the rails as any conversation about DeAndre Ayton can go, I do think it's important for Suns fans to remember that even a bad game for DeAndre Ayton now is so much better than like his rookie year, because defensively he is just a good pick and roll defender every single time he lines up to play pick and roll defense. And it's nice that sort of pick and roll defense is sort of gone from the conversation about him, because if you guys remember, you had a podcast, David. We had one in his rookie year that we talked about that every week. We talked about his pick and roll defense and how lost he was on that. Now, every single game, it's good defense on the pick and rolls. I think there are other times where if he's not getting down the court fast enough, or there's some help defense issues that could be there, but it's nice that we are able to not have to talk about the defense. And that's what I mean by the perspective. I think the perspective now is there, and we need to remind ourselves, this is something that KOC brought up when we were talking earlier, remind you of who they used to be and who they are now. And I think that's a smart point to make, because where he's at defensively is just miles and miles beyond where he was previously. The one thing I think that helped in those 4 games is just a little bit more effort and focus on the defensive end. Yep. But it's nice that it's not a lot. Like, it's just a little bit. There's just small things that will make him an excellent, excellent defender, and he's so close to it already. Offensively, I think a lot of the conversation is now going to shift over there for the rest of the season as well, but that's because of how good he's been on defense. What have you thought about Ayton defensively?
Yeah, I think I've touched on quite a lot throughout his career. Even the rookie flashes that he showed on defense, I think it still exists now.
The infamous Giannis game. Always love coming back to that one.
That's the perfect example. I think when he's been given a very specific role and challenged, he's responded all the time. And I think the job for the coaching staff, and I've said this a few times, is even in these really mundane games when you're playing OKC on a Wednesday night, they have to give him a very specific defensive task. That one was really difficult. They had Al Horford trying to drag him out of the paint, which is where he's not comfortable. All of a sudden, Al's got 3 from 3, and DeAndre's head gets muddled and he's not sure where he's supposed to be, and that's when you kind of hear Chris Paul yelling DA all the time in help situations. So I think that's on the coaching staff just as much as it is on Ayton. That's just fact. I would love to think that DeAndre Ayton was a 10-year vet that didn't need extra motivation every night through an 80-game season, but it's just been shown through his 3 seasons so far. He does. He needs kind of extra challenges, extra roles to kind of lock him in. But you're right, Mike, there's a reason we're talking mostly as a fan base about the offense, and that's because defensively he is very, very good already and has made huge leaps, and the conversation would be just so much different if he was struggling to the same extent on offense that he is on defense right now. And that's really why I kind of go at pains. It's not really a perfect comparison at all. And I was going to get into comparisons with you guys before we ended, just to throw a random ex-Phoenix Sun at you, but it's why I use Rudy Gobert as DeAndre Ayton's comparison, because he's so hard to compare to ex-Suns. We haven't had a lot of, great storied history with big men at the Phoenix Suns, so there's not many guys we can compare him to there. He's also really hard to just pigeonhole against, recently retired players or current guys in the NBA. But in terms of role, they're certainly not the same player. DeAndre is way more skilled and has a better touch than Rudy Gobert. But in terms of his defensive impact and then the role that I would like to see him play on this Phoenix Suns team, it's very similar to Rudy Gobert, and that's why I kind of have the checklist that I have and why I hold him to the high standard that I do, because I think that kind of impact is, what we need to be holding Ayton to and trying to expect from him if we want to be a really good playoff team this season.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you've talked about it a lot of times before, David. Just for the Suns to be the best team this season, it's having Ayton be a really, really, really good garbage man, and it's not the sexiest role. But then, I'm sorry to go back to offense. It's just we have to talk about this stuff too. Sometimes he does dribble, and I think that's an interesting thing to talk about in that stretch, because you covered it, and it's like, well, that doesn't make you the best team right now. But on the other hand, he was getting plays, I think it was the Houston game off the top of my head, where he got a wide open lane and he took like 2 dribbles and just went right at the rim in a way that we've never seen before. And it's like, okay, Ayton can be a really good player this year just by focusing on defense. Obviously, any interview he has with the press, it's clear that that's the message that's being ingrained in his head, is I'm focusing on defense and catching lobs and whatever. However, if you want him to be a better player eventually, the dribbling stuff is really interesting, and it kind of just comes and correlates with that aggression. So I'm curious where you currently stand on that, David. Is just like, obviously you were excited to see the dribbling, otherwise you wouldn't have written about it. But to what extent should it be, in his development plan?
Yeah, I think the play you mentioned is the perfect way to kind of speak on this, and particularly in contrast to, say, what we saw Frank Kaminsky do against the Warriors at the end of the game, or for the whole game, really, in the minutes that he played. I wouldn't be designing sets or running anything like they did through Frank, where you're kind of reliant on a few dribbles, making a read, passing it off. I just don't think that's where Ayton's skill set sits right now. Maybe it does in the future, but I think the team would kind of splutter and, kind of seize up even more than what we're seeing at the moment through stretches offensively if they try and run that stuff. So the team success would be worse off for doing that. But what I want to see from DeAndre, and what was so exciting in those 4 games, was when the opportunity presents itself as an audible, not the main action, in that play that you mentioned, DeMarcus Cousins just totally overplayed the inbounds pass, thinking he could get a steal. And guys do that against Ayton because they know that even if they stuff up, Ayton's not great at putting it on the floor and probably isn't going to punish them for making the mistake. That's what made that play so exciting for me, is Ayton turned over his right shoulder, saw the open lane, put it on the floor 2 times, and when the Suns shared it later, I don't think we gave that play even enough credit at the time, because he finger rolled it in from 6 feet out and showed that touch that he has, and that was kind of thrilling for all of us to see that in slow motion. Mike, I think you even talked about the above angle of that one, making it kind of appear, well, not appear, like it actually giving it the credit that it was due for a play like that. So I just want to see him attack from those positions when his opponent tries to gamble, or he's essentially trying to make fun of him by the fact that he can't do anything by putting it on the floor and punishing him. Just do it in those situations. We saw it in that Memphis one. He basically acted as if he felt disrespected that Tillman was trying to guard him in the post, and he just that's a rookie. Like, that's what Ayton
Right.
should be doing in his third
Right.
year. Like, how dare you try
Right.
and guard me with this dude? I'm going to, put it on his head. And he did. And that was awesome to see as well. But that's what I was talking about before. Just because we see a couple of flashes like that, I don't think the conversation should automatically move to, oh, we need to be feeding Ayton more. We're taking too many threes. When we're missing threes, we've got to run stuff for Ayton in the post. I just don't think that's long-term or short-term success for this team, I should say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's very exciting to have this type of conversation about him and just how much he's improved and how interesting he'll look going forward. The next few games will be fun to watch after that stretch. I think he set a standard for himself that a lot of Suns fans are probably going to hold him to.
Perfect, yeah.
David, I appreciate you coming onto this podcast. I appreciate everything you do writing about the Suns, and I appreciate having basketball conversations with you, as Sam and I do probably almost every single day. So thank you very much for coming on. Subscribe to the newsletter. Is there anything else that you'd like to plug?
No, not at all. Just follow me on Twitter, guys. Subscribe to the Substack, which you can find through my Twitter. And thanks very much for you guys, or to you guys, I should say, for having me on this extra special podcast, I suppose we should call it.
Thanks, David.
Breaking up is hard to do, but when it comes to your wireless carrier, you should have left a while ago. You're over the big three carriers. You deserve better. Xfinity Mobile. Now you can get unlimited with 5G included for just $30 a month on the nation's fastest, most reliable network. So break free from the big three and save with Xfinity Mobile.
Take the savings challenge at xfinitymobile.com/mysavings to see how much you can save when you get Xfinity Mobile and Internet together. Reduced speeds at 20 gigabytes per line. Most reliable based on Root Metrics US report. Results vary, not an endorsement.
This episode is brought to you by Ro. Confidence is everything. Women can sense it. And trust me, they love it. But if you're in your head worried about performance, that swag, unfortunately, gentlemen, is gone. Ro Sparks keeps you ready. When the moment hits, you can step up like a superhero and handle your business. No doubt, just confidence.
Fellas, Ro Sparks gets you ready fast, dissolving under your tongue and working in 15 minutes on average. No waiting, no missing the moment, plus it stays active up to 36 hours.
So when the mood hits, you can go back to back to back, round after round after round. Ro connects guys with medical provider 100% online, so there's no awkward conversation with in-person providers. Go to ro.com/sparks to see if you qualify. If prescribed, new sexual health patients gets $15 off Sparks on reoccurring plan. Connect with the provider at ro.co/fourth to find out if prescriptions Ro Sparks are right for you. That's ro.co/fourth for $15 off your first order. If approved, treatment ships directly to their door. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and or manufacturing review. For full safety information, go to ro.co/safety info.